Welcome to the note snippet for 6.2, State Expansion. The 19th century was a time of great expansion and transformation as European states sought to establish colonies and extend their influence throughout the world. These notes will explore imperialism in Africa and Southeast Asia and the impact it had on the people and societies of these regions. King Leopold was a Belgian monarch who is known for his brutal exploitation of the Congo Free State, which he owned as his own private property, resulting in the deaths of millions of Congolese people. Queen Victoria ruled over the British Empire during this period of expansion and colonization, and her reign saw the growth of British influence and power around the world. Empress Dowager Cixi supported policies that aimed to modernize China while also resisting foreign influence and imperialism. Cecil Rhodes was a British businessman and politician who played a major role in the expansion of the British Empire in Africa. He believed in the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race and sought to establish British dominance over African territories, leading to the colonization and exploitation of these areas. Catherine the Great was a Russian empress who expanded her empire through military conquests and diplomacy, leading to Russia becoming a major European power. The Dutch and British East India Companies were powerful trading companies that played a significant role in the colonization of Asia by European powers by establishing trading posts and colonies throughout the region. A settler colony is a type of colony that is established by people from a foreign country who settle in the colonized territory and establish permanent communities. The Suez Canal is a man-made waterway that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, allowing ships to travel between Europe and Asia. The Boxer Rebellion was an anti-foreign, anti-Christian uprising that took place in China from 1899 to 1901. Afrikaner refers to a white South African of Dutch descent. The Monroe Doctrine was a policy statement issued by U.S. President James Monroe in 1823 that declared that any attempt by European powers to colonize or interfere with states in North or South America would be viewed as acts of aggression against the United States. European powers used two methods to control their colonies: direct control and indirect control. Direct control involved the use of military and administrative power to govern the colony, while indirect control involved working through local leaders and institutions. Indirect control was used in less important colonies, while direct control was used in more strategically important or economically valuable ones. Pause now if you need to make notes on this information. Imperialism in Africa. New technology, such as steam-powered boats and quinine, enabled better travel and trade in Africa. Steam-powered boats allowed European powers to navigate rivers and lakes more easily, opening up new trade routes and making it easier to transport goods and people. Quinine, a medicine that was used to treat malaria, allowed Europeans to venture further into Africa without succumbing to the disease, which had previously been a major obstacle to exploration and colonization. These new technologies helped European powers gain greater access to Africa's resources and establish control over its territories. The completion of the Suez Canal in 1869 was a significant event because it allowed European powers to establish more direct trade routes with their colonies in Asia and Africa. The canal connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, making it easier and faster for ships to travel between Europe and Asia without having to sail around the southern tip of Africa. This reduced travel time and costs, making it easier for European powers to transport goods and people to their colonies, which helped them gain greater access to resources and establish control over their territories. The Suez Canal also became a symbol of European imperialism in Africa and Asia, as it was built by French and British engineers with the goal of expanding their influence in these regions. European rivalries intensified as countries competed for control over African territories and resources. This led to European warfare in Africa with superior weaponry, as European powers sought to gain an advantage over their rivals and establish dominance over the continent. European states that expanded empires in Africa included Britain, Belgium, and France. A treaty signed between Britain and the King of Opobo in Nigeria benefited both parties through palm oil trade. The treaty allowed British traders to establish a monopoly over the palm oil trade in the region, while also providing protection for the King of Opobo's territory against rival African powers. France drove the Ottomans out of Algeria in the 19th century through military campaigns, which allowed them to establish control over the territory and create a settler colony. This created tensions between French settlers and Algerians, leading to the eventual Algerian War of Independence. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 marked what's been called the Scramble for Africa, as European powers met to divide and colonize African territories. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 formalized the division of Africa among European powers, leading to the colonization and subjugation of African peoples. However, no Africans were present at the conference, and their interests and opinions were not taken into account in the decisions made by European powers. In less than 30 years, European powers took over almost the entire African continent through a combination of military conquest, treaties, and economic exploitation. King Leopold took possession of the Congo as personal property and kept 100% of profits. Later, control shifted from private ownership to government control. As many as 8 million people perished under King Leopold's reign of terror in the Congo. In 1908, Belgium took over control of the Congo as a regular colony, and conditions improved. When the British colonized Uganda, they encouraged cotton as a cash crop there as well, and it soon replaced enslaved people and ivory as the chief export. South Africa was a scene of brutal fighting over land between the British and Dutch Afrikaners, which led to the displacement of many black Africans and Afrikaners from their homes. The British Army drove these groups from their lands, forcing many into refugee camps that were segregated by race, leading to many deaths from starvation. The Boer Wars were a series of conflicts between the British and Dutch Afrikaners in South Africa over land. These wars were characterized by brutal fighting, displacement of many black Africans and Afrikaners from their homes, and the establishment of concentration camps. Imperialism in Asia. European nations dominated China's economy through exclusive trading rights and access to natural resources, but China remained an independent state with its own government. During the Taiping Rebellion, European powers assisted the Qing dynasty in suppressing the rebellion, which allowed them to further expand their influence and control over China's economy. The Boxer Rebellion saw anti-imperialist group Boxers attacking Chinese Christians and Western missionaries, encouraged by the Empress. The rebellion was an anti-foreign and anti-Christian uprising in China that was fueled by resentment towards Western imperialism and the spread of Christianity. The Boxers attempted to rid China of Western influence, especially from Christian missionaries, but were ultimately suppressed by foreign powers. The 7 Years' War was a costly conflict for France, which lost much of its colonial empire as a result. The war contributed to France's already significant debt, which was one of the factors that led to the French Revolution. The East India Company, a British trading company, gradually expanded its control over South Asia by encroaching on the Mughal Empire's territory. As the British moved further inland, they recruited native Indian soldiers called sepoys to join their colonial army. However, in 1857, the sepoys rebelled against the British in an unsuccessful uprising known as the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The Dutch seized control of the Spice Islands, which were known for producing spices such as cloves and nutmeg that were in high demand in Europe. The French colonized Indochina, while the British took control of the Malay Peninsula and established the port of Singapore. In Indonesia and Southeast Asia, control shifted from the Dutch East India Company to direct control by the Dutch government. By the end of the 18th century, corruption had caused the company to go bankrupt. As a result, the Dutch government took direct control of the Dutch East Indies in order to maintain its economic interests in the region. This shift from private to government control marked a significant change in how the Dutch governed their colonies in Southeast Asia. Australia was used as a penal colony by Great Britain, where convicts from England, Scotland, and Ireland were sent to perform hard labor. Later on, Britain annexed New Zealand as a settler colony, encouraging British citizens to migrate there and establish permanent settlements. Settler colonies. A settler colony sends citizens to live permanently in a colonized area, establishing control and spreading culture and values. The goals of settler colonies were to establish permanent settlements in new territories and to expand the influence and power of the colonizing country. Settler colonies were often established in areas with abundant natural resources, such as land, minerals, or agricultural products, which could be exploited for economic gain. The settlers themselves were often encouraged to farm or mine these resources, which would then be exported back to the colonizing country. In some cases, settler colonies were also established as a way to relieve population pressures in the colonizing country by encouraging immigration. Russia, the U.S., and Japan expand. The United States expanded its territory through a combination of military conquest and economic influence. The U.S. acquired new territories such as Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines through military force or political maneuvering. It also established economic dominance over Latin America through policies such as the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary, which asserted U.S. control over the region's resources and markets. In addition to military conquest and economic influence, the United States also expanded its territory through the forced relocation of Native Americans, such as the Cherokee, from their ancestral lands in the southeast to what is now Oklahoma. This policy of Indian removal was part of a broader strategy of U.S. expansionism that sought to acquire new land and resources for American settlers and businesses. The Spanish-American War was a conflict between the United States and Spain in 1898, fought primarily over the issue of Cuban independence. The U.S. emerged victorious, gaining control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, and establishing itself as a major imperial power. Russia expanded its territory and influence into Central Asia, which brought it into conflict with the British Empire. This rivalry over Central Asia is known as the Great Game, and it was driven by both strategic and economic interests. The Great Game ultimately ended in a stalemate, with Russia retaining control over much of Central Asia but failing to establish a direct land route to India, while Britain maintained its dominance in South Asia. Japan pursued a policy of expansionism and territorial acquisition in East Asia, which was driven by a desire for resources and a need to protect its own interests. This put Japan in conflict with other imperial powers such as the United States and European nations, and ultimately contributed to the outbreak of World War II. European colonial control varied in Africa, from indirect to direct, with goals of assimilation or developing future leaders. Uganda was a protectorate of Britain until Imperial British East Africa Company transferred control to British government. Area where an outside power has exclusive trading privileges is a sphere of influence. Independent countries controlled by private business is economic imperialism, such as the fruit company controlling pineapple trade in Hawaii. State-run imperialism involves a colonial power directly controlling a colony through its government or military. Settler colonialism involves the migration of people from the colonizing country to the colony, with the goal of establishing permanent settlements and replacing or dominating the indigenous population. Economic domination, also known as economic imperialism, involves a powerful country exerting control over another country's economy through trade, investment, or debt. Each type of imperialism has different features and outcomes, but all involve one country exerting control over another for its own benefit. That covers the historical developments the College Board will be testing you on. Pause and review these developments for topic 6.2. Here are the historical developments in a nutshell. Pause if you need to. Visit MrB.com for more resources.